Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Annie Bukacek, last name spelled B-U-K-A-C-E-K. I've been a physician for over 30 years, and I'm the president of Montana Pro-Life Coalition. And I also want to say how grateful I am for you sitting here with your kind attention that you've given us. Greg DeVries talked about how the opposition, the opponents to personhood, they don't talk about personhood. They don't deny the personhood of the unborn. And in the 12 years that we've had personhood amendments talked about here in Helena, none of the opponents have ever addressed the nature of the bill itself. And there's a reason for that. It's because the humanity of the unborn child is unequivocally disclosed by science, as people talked about today. And this is a little 12-week baby with all the perfect little features. And 8 weeks prior, this baby had a heartbeat. And 4 weeks prior, this baby had a nervous system. Or 6 weeks prior, excuse me. So I want to just address quickly, the other thing is there's no argument against, there's no rational, reasonable argument against the legal protection of all human beings. So they never address that either. So what do the opponents of the personhood bill talk about? I'm going to talk about this briefly. They say if personhood passes, and this is a fallacy, they say that miscarriages and treatments of ectopic pregnancies will be called murder. That is absolutely not true. Before Roe versus Wade, there was no case of miscarriage ever investigated as murder. Ectopic pregnancies, that's a life-threatening situation for the mother. There was a woman who testified this morning about a life-threatening situation that she had when her baby was 23 weeks. That's about this size right here. And these babies sometimes survive, usually do not. She had to have the baby taken quickly, and the baby survived and lived for 4 days. If that baby had died during the procedure, that would not be considered abortion, because the purpose of the procedure was not to destroy the child. The purpose of the procedure was to save the life of the mother. So I'm here to tell you without a doubt, absolutely, there is no incident where the life of the mother, that abortion has to be performed to preserve the life of the mother. They will also talk about how if this bill is passed, that contraceptives will be outlawed. Contraceptives were legal prior to Roe versus Wade. They would not be outlawed. The opponents to personhood will also talk about domestic violence, rape, and incest, as though somehow making unborn babies disposable, that will enhance the safety and value of women. We've had many proponents testify today, including the superintendent of that school, about the coarseness of humanity that occurs when we are allowed to destroy our own children. The opponents will also talk about the cost of putting a referendum on there, which is really nothing. And they'll talk about how they'll say that the Montanans don't want this because there were attempts in the past, and I headed those up, to collect enough signatures to get this on the ballot, and it did not pass. We were 3,000 short of 51,000 one time. That's pretty close for something that's totally unfunded. It's all volunteers. What is it? At the time we were collecting signatures, the cost was a $500,000 to get something on the ballot. We did it for nothing. We all volunteered our time. And now I think it's up to $1 million or $2 million to get something on the ballot. It's very expensive. So don't let them convince you, please, that Montanans don't want this. I guarantee you Montanans want personhood. They'll also talk empathically in the appearance, and I will give them the benefit of the doubt that it truly is empathy, that they'll say they feel bad for people that have regretted their abortions. And I take that at face value, that they feel bad for those that have regretted abortions, and then they'll say something along the lines, but we also want to support those that are fine with their decision. And I just want to say that the murder of somebody, whether that's right or wrong, is never dependent on how the person involved in the murder feels about it. The only topic that I have heard opponents talk about that's actually relevant to personhood has to do with reproductive clinics. But what they tell you about reproductive clinics is less relevant than what they don't tell you about reproductive clinics. And I have a handout that I will give about that. They will talk about infertile couples sometimes able to conceive and give birth through the help of their clinics, and sometimes parents will come in that have been able to conceive this way, and they'll talk about their child and how wonderful it is. And they'll tell you that that the way that they do business will become illegal if personhood passes, and that may well be true. What they won't tell you is the cold hard cash that clinic makes. The cost of a couple going through this process, and this is whether they conceive or not, whether they have a baby or not, the average is $60,000. And insurance companies, I don't know of any insurance company that covers that, so that's cold hard cash. These clinics collect. I've talked to patients of mine that it's cost them over $100,000, and again, that's whether they conceive or not. The other thing that they won't talk about is the lives lost for every in vitro embryo that implants and comes to birth. A typical cycle, and this is nationwide, our clinic in Billings might be different, so I'm just giving you general information to get the idea. But a typical, what they call cycle, there's 3 embryos, and maybe one will take. Sometimes 2 or 3 will take, but usually it's just one. And on average, it takes 5 cycles, so that would be 15 embryos. And generally speaking, of those 15 embryos, 14 of them will die. So it's estimated somewhere roughly 200,000 babies have been born through in vitro fertilization since 1981. And if you look at the 1 per 14 deaths, that's estimated 2,800,000 embryos placed have died. So that does not include frozen embryos that are not used, never used. It does not count those that are destroyed because by their ability to evaluate, they say these embryos are not prime material. It also doesn't count the number of babies that are lost to malfunction of storage, and that's what my handout is. Well, I'll give it to you afterwards, but it's a. Well, would you mind? If you could give this to them, please. And this please keep in mind, this comes from the Annals of Internal Medicine. This is not a pro-life magazine or periodical, anything like that. It's the Annals of Internal Medicine. I'm an internist, so I get that journal, and I'm a member of the American College of Physicians. And this is not a pro-life article. If you want the whole article, I can give it to you. But what it talks about is what happened to these babies. And this is Cleveland, Ohio. This is a big reproductive clinic. They've been in business longer than our one has in Billings. And one of the liquid nitrogen where they store these babies, these embryos, it broke down. And 4,000, what they call eggs and embryos, were destroyed. And then the article goes on to talk about, it says, this incident is not the first time that reproductive materials have been unintentionally discarded, destroyed, or otherwise harmed. Knowing how frequently such errors happen is difficult. It's non-regulated. It says, no such public or private system for tracking harmful reproductive errors exists in the United States. As a result, the incidence of professional lapses in materials of procreation in this country is unknown. And this was published last November, and this incident was in March. It says, few federal regulations pertain to assisted reproductive technology. And then it gives, on the handout that I give you, it gives references, and some of the references say things like, failure affects more patients than thought in these reproductive clinics. Transparency, challenges in reproductive health care, reproductive negligence. And so these fertility reproductive clinics are not all they're cracked up to be. And my question is, how many babies must die for infertile couples to have a child by these unregulated procedures? Please don't ignore your natural instincts to protect those that can't protect themselves. I think most of you probably like to protect the underdog. Doesn't get any tinier or more defenseless than an unborn child. And I just pray that you'll go by your instincts and please pass House Bill 302. Thank you so much.